What happens when a woman no longer seeks approval, no longer asks permission, and no longer fears being alone? In the empire that worshipped war and silenced women, she didn't rise through power. She rose through stillness. They tried to bury her with shame, but she stood where legions fell. Interested in the story? Keep on watching and let me know where you are watching from. I'm your host, Alfred, and today I will be telling you a story about a woman who never asked to rule, but became unforgettable because she refused to kneel. They called her cursed before she had a name, the daughter of a general who died with his eyes open and his sword still warm in his hand, betrayed by the empire he bled for. Aurelia was born not into legacy, but into the ashes of it, raised behind stone walls and colder silences, where servants whispered prayers before entering her chambers and never dared to meet her eyes. She did not cry when her mother left, nor when Rome claimed their estate as payment for disgrace. At 12, she was taught how to read Cicero and wield a dagger in the same hour, and by 16, she had already turned down 4 marriages, each more politically clever than the last. She did not smile when she refused. She simply looked at each suitor and said, "I am not for purchase." The city learned quickly that she was not to be summoned. She appeared only where she chose, at war councils where she was not invited, at temples where even the priests lowered their voices, and once, famously, at the funeral of the very man who had condemned her father. She stood at the back, dressed in black with her hair unbound, and never blinked once during the procession. Afterward, the widow of the dead man claimed Aurelia's eyes had turned the air cold. But Aurelia made no claims. She wrote no letters. She made no friends. What she did instead was walk the ruins of what others had tried to own. Battlefields littered with the bones of ambition, shrines where gods no longer answered prayers, and palaces where power trembled behind gold and shadow. Her presence unsettled the old and electrified the young. In the marketplaces, girls started tying their hair like hers. Boys told stories of the day she passed by, and the dogs stopped barking. When one senator's son mocked her in the bathhouse, said she walked like a man and loved like a ghost, his father found him the next morning with a bloodied mouth and eyes full of quiet terror. He never said her name again. Aurelia didn't gloat. She simply continued. She ate alone. She trained alone. She spoke only when it mattered, and never twice. And in that silence, Rome began to shift. Not with rebellion, not with prophecy, but with awareness that somewhere in the city's cracked foundation, a woman walked freely, without asking, without kneeling, without offering her name like tribute. Some called her arrogant, others called her divine. But all agreed on this. When she walked through the forum, the pigeons did not fly. They bowed. The summons came at dusk, sealed in crimson wax and carried by a servant who looked everywhere but into her eyes. Most would have knelt upon receiving such a call. The emperor's table was not a place for whispers or wanderers. But Aurelia merely held the parchment between her fingers, as if weighing the arrogance it carried, and then folded it without a word. She arrived not in silk or gold, but in the same black tunic she wore to walk the hills of her father's forgotten lands. The palace guards stiffened as she passed, unsure whether to bow or block the way, but she did not pause long enough for them to decide. The great hall was already full. Generals with polished medals, senators with perfumed robes, wives with painted mouths whispering behind jeweled fans. And there, above them all, lounged the emperor, Marcus Silvanus, draped in imperial purple, eyes gleaming with amusement and something sharper. The room, quieted as she entered. No fanfare, no announcement, just the sound of her footsteps echoing like thunder across marble. "Aurelia," he said, raising his goblet, "we feared you'd forgotten the Empire still breathes." She did not smile. It breathes, but it does not see. A few courtiers gasped. One coughed awkwardly into his wine, but the Emperor only laughed, that slow, deliberate laugh of a man who has killed without lifting his hand. "Still your father's daughter," he mused, "stubborn, blunt, tragically unwed." She said nothing, but her gaze pinned him like a spear to the throne. The meal that followed was an exercise in theatre, lavish courses, hollow toasts, carefully veiled insults passed like bread. Aurelia did not eat. She drank only water. Her presence was not performance, it was protest. Sylvanus tried to draw her out with questions cloaked in jest. "Do you dream of power, my dear, or only of your father's ghost?" "I dream of Rome," she said, "when it had honor." The silence that followed cut deeper than any sword. Later, in a private corridor gilded with ivy and moonlight, he cornered her. "You could be more than a shadow," he whispered. "I could give you titles, land, a place beside me." She tilted her head slowly, almost curiously. "You mistake me for someone seeking permission." "Every woman wants something," he said. "Even wolves want shelter." She stepped closer then, not afraid, not angry, just endless. "Then you should be afraid of the one who doesn't." He watched her walk away, unable to follow. That night, the Emperor slept with one eye open, and the city began to whisper louder. Not about scandal, not about seduction, but about a woman who refused the hand that fed her because she had learned to grow her own. A woman who stood at the Emperor's table without bending, who offered no flattery, no flirtation, no fear. She was not rising. She had already arrived, alone, untethered and untouched, like a blade forged not in fire but in silence. Long before dawn, when even Rome held its breath, Aurelia stood alone in the training yard of the 12th Legion, the last remnants of an army that once crushed kingdoms with its shadows. The men stationed there were old or broken, some by battle, some by disgrace. No banners flew, no horns sounded, just the groan of rusted armor and the slow blink of torches burning too low. She had come not to lead them, not to inspire them, but to see them, to remember what the Empire buried. She moved through the rows of silent men like a storm searching for stillness, dressed again in black, her boots covered in dust, her eyes older than her years. Some recognized her, veterans who had marched under her father's name, who had watched him bleed on foreign soil for a Senate that forgot him by sundown. They did not salute her, but they stood taller when she passed. A centurion approached. His shoulder was twisted from an old wound, his beard thick with silver. "We're not yours to command," he said not unkindly. "And I'm not here to command," she answered. "I'm here to remember the men Rome used, then discarded." He studied her a long while. Then he gestured to a battered training circle. "Then show us something worth remembering." She removed her cloak in one motion, stepped into the circle, and faced the first soldier, a broad man with nothing to lose and too much pride to bow. They fought not for blood, but truth. Steel rang against steel. Dust flew, breath shortened, but she never fell. She moved like memory, sharp, exact, impossible to erase. By the time the sun broke over the walls, she had faced 5, bruised in silence, each man walking away not humiliated, but changed. The last one knelt, not from defeat, but recognition. "Your father bled with us," he said, and you don't flinch. No, she said softly, I don't. Word spread faster than fire. A woman had walked into the bones of Rome's forgotten legion and left with their eyes, not with loyalty, but with respect. In the days that followed, the legion's camp grew louder, not with orders, but with purpose. Weapons were cleaned, armor mended, old maps redrawn. When asked who had commanded it, the centurion said only, "No one." She reminded us who we are. Back in the city, the emperor's spies reported uneasily. "She's not building an army," one said. "She's building memory." And in a city where memory was often buried beneath marble and ego, that was more dangerous than 1,000 swords. Aurelia didn't seek rebellion. She sought remembrance. And in that remembrance, she gave ghosts a voice, not to fight for her, but to stand again, to remind the empire that its blood was not only royal, but real, that honor could not be killed, only forgotten. And she was the one Rome would never forget, not because she ruled, but because she endured where others begged to belong, because she stood where legions fell. They unveiled the statue on the first day of summer, when the city's air hung heavy with incense and suspicion. No one knew who commissioned it. No signatures, no seals. Just a single slab of white marble standing silent in the forum where trials were held and sentences echoed louder than prayers. The sculptor had carved her not in triumph, not in mourning, but in stillness. Aurelia stood barefoot, cloak wrapped like a storm around her shoulders, one hand resting lightly on the hilt of a blade that remained sheathed. Her head was turned slightly, listening, not commanding. Her face, unreadable, fierce, quiet. A woman without plea or promise. The Senate erupted by nightfall. "She mocks tradition," they cried. "No statue without service, no honor without title." But when they demanded the artist be found, none stepped forward. Perhaps because Rome already knew, Aurelia had not posed for glory. She had been sculpted in absence by those who watched her pass without kneeling, by daughters who learned silence could be strength, by old men who remembered another general with the same eyes. She did not attend the unveiling. She stood instead in the hills above the city, watching the crowds from a distance, her arms folded, her jaw tight. Behind her, a rider approached, dust on his tunic, a seal in his palm. "They've summoned you again," he said. "Another trial. This time they want you to defend yourself." "From what?" she asked. "From not playing the game," he answered. She turned then, slow as dusk. "They should fear the ones who never learned the rules." That night, torches gathered outside her villa, fists pounding on doors, names shouted like curses. But Aurelia did not run. She did not speak. She walked through the mob as if walking through fog, their rage sliding off her like wind off stone. When one man spat at her feet and called her harlot, she looked him in the eye and said, "You confuse silence with shame. That's your failure, not mine." The mob parted, not out of mercy, but because fire does not argue. It burns. She entered the Senate hall at dawn, alone, unarmed, with dust on her hem and no apology in her gaze. "You will speak?" one senator asked, sweat on his brow. "Only once," she said, "and never again." Her speech lasted 3 minutes. No poetry, no tears, just a litany of truths so sharp they cut the room into stillness. She did not defend herself. She revealed them, one by one, and when she finished, she walked away before they could vote. "She doesn't care for verdicts," someone whispered. "She is her own." That week, Rome changed again. No laws were passed, no banners raised, But in alleyways, women walked straighter. In temples, girls prayed less for husbands and more for their own strength. And at the base of her statue, someone carved a final line in the marble. She stood where legions fell, not to be seen, but to be remembered. Aurelia returned to the hills, the wind curling through her hair like prophecy. She didn't build an empire. She didn't wear a crown. But the world watched her walk and learned something ancient. Some women do not conquer kingdoms. They become them.